Did a mother truly negotiate her daughter's marriages for political power? Did a young woman, barely a teenager, have her life and future decided by men in rooms she was not allowed to enter? What happens when a woman's reputation is destroyed to serve the ambitions of her family? The stories of the Borgia women are often told through the lens of scandal. But the truth is more complex and in many ways more astonishing. It's a story of survival, intelligence, and the quiet accumulation of power in a world designed to deny them any. Number 18. How did a Spanish outsider become Rome's most powerful mother? Vanessa de Catani owned more than a dozen inns and properties in Rome, making her one of the city's wealthiest independent businesswomen. She was not an aristocrat by birth. Her family was likely from the lower nobility or merchant class. Despite her long association with Rodrigo Borgia, she married 3 separate times to legitimate her social standing, and each husband benefited greatly from the connection. Her last will and testament left a significant fortune not just to her children but also to religious institutions, a common practice to secure one's legacy and spiritual standing. So who was this woman, really? Vanessa de Catane is often remembered in a single role, the longtime mistress of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, the man who would become Pope Alexander VI, and the mother of his most famous children, Cesare, Juan, Lucrezia, and Jufor. But to see her only in that light is to miss the full picture of a remarkably savvy and resilient woman. She was not a passing fancy. Her connection with Rodrigo lasted for well over a decade, a period in which she provided him with a family, a domestic anchor that he clearly valued. This was not a hidden, shameful affair in the modern sense. In Renaissance Rome, powerful churchmen having mistresses and children was common, if officially frowned upon. The key was discretion and providing for the family you created. Vanessa was born in 1442. Her origins are a bit murky, but she was not from the Roman elite. She was an outsider. Her relationship with Rodrigo Borgia began around 1470 when he was already a powerful and wealthy vice-chancellor of the church. He was in his late 30s and she was in her late 20s. What she offered was stability. While Rodrigo engaged in the high-stakes politics of the Papal States, Vanessa created a home. She gave him 4 children who would become the pillars of his dynastic ambitions. He acknowledged them all, bestowing upon them titles and securing their futures. But Vanessa was more than a mother. She was a manager. Rodrigo settled a considerable amount of wealth on her, but she did not simply live off his generosity. She took that capital and grew it. She became a significant property owner in Rome. Her primary business was in hospitality. She owned a number of inns, or alberghi, which were lucrative ventures in a city that was a constant destination for pilgrims, diplomats, and merchants. These were not just small taverns, they were substantial businesses that required keen management skills. She understood the Roman real estate market and she invested wisely, building a portfolio that gave her financial independence. This was crucial. It meant her status was not solely dependent on Rodrigo's favor. She had her own power base, built on coin and property deeds. Her social maneuvering was just as astute. In a society where an unmarried woman, even one connected to a powerful man, had a precarious position, Vanessa used marriage to her advantage. Rodrigo Borgia arranged for marriages. Her first husband, Domenico d'Arignano, provided a veneer of respectability. After his passing, she married Giorgio di Croce. During this marriage, her son Cesare was born. The official records listed Giorgio as the father, a convenient fiction that protected the cardinal's reputation. After Giorgio's death, Rodrigo arranged her third marriage to Carlo Canali, a scholar and man of letters. Each marriage elevated her social standing and gave her and her children a legitimate place in Roman society. Her husbands, in turn, received prestigious appointments and financial benefits thanks to their connection to Rodrigo. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Even after Rodrigo's passion for her cooled and he took other younger mistresses like the beautiful Giulia Farnese, Vanessa was not cast aside. She remained a respected figure in the Borgia family circle. She transitioned from lover to a matriarchal figure, a trusted advisor. Her relationship with her children was deep and lasting. Lucrezia, in particular, remained close to her mother throughout her life, and their surviving letters show a genuine bond of affection and trust. Venozia was present at Lucrezia's wedding celebrations, a public acknowledgement of her role that would have been unthinkable for a disgraced former mistress. Venosa outlived Rodrigo and all of her sons. She witnessed the dizzying rise of the Borgia family and its just as rapid fall after Pope Alexander VI's death in 1503. While her son Cesare scrambled to hold on to his power and ultimately failed, Venosa remained secure in Rome. Her wealth was her own. Her properties were legally hers. She was a respected local figure, known for her business sense and her later piety. In her final years, she dedicated much of her time and money to charitable works and religious confraternities. Her tomb, now lost, was placed in a prominent chapel in the Basilica of Santa Maria del Popolo, a sign of her considerable status. It bore an inscription that acknowledged her as the mother of Cesare, Juan, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey, a final public declaration of her role in one of history's most notorious families. She was not a victim or a footnote. She was a founder. Number 17 was Venosa de Catanei, just a mistress or a business tycoon. Venosa de Catanei's last will, dated 1517, cataloged an impressive estate that included multiple inns near the Campo de' Fiori, Rome's bustling market square. She owned the Albergo del Leone, the Albergo del Sol, and others prime real estate in the heart of the city. She also owned numerous rental houses and vineyards. Her total assets made her wealthier than many noble families. She managed these properties herself, employing staff, negotiating leases, and overseeing renovations. This level of hands-on business management by a woman was highly unusual for the era. She was not just a landlord, she was a developer and an entrepreneur. The term mistress fails to capture the reality of Venosa de Catanei's life. It suggests a passive role, a woman kept in luxury, dependent on the whims of a powerful man. Venosa was anything but passive. She was the architect of her own fortune, using the seed capital from Rodrigo Borgia to build an empire of brick and mortar that would outlast his papal reign and the political power of her children. Her story is a lesson in Renaissance economics and female agency. Her business acumen was centered on one key insight: Rome was a city of transients. Every day, thousands of people poured into the city. There were pilgrims visiting its holy sites, diplomats on missions to the Vatican, merchants trading goods, and lawyers arguing cases in the church courts. All of these people needed a place to stay, to eat, and to conduct business. Venosa provided that. Her inns were not just rooms for rent, they were social hubs. Owning an inn like the Albergo del Sol, one of her most famous properties, was like owning a modern hotel combined with a conference center. It was a place where information was exchanged, deals were made, and reputations were forged. And she owned the real estate. Her strategy was sound. She acquired properties in high traffic areas. The Campo de' Fiori was not just a market, it was the center of Roman commercial life. The streets around the Vatican were also prime locations. She understood that location was everything. She didn't just buy and hold property, she actively managed it. Documents show her involved in the day-to-day operations. This was not an aristocrat's detached ownership, where a steward handles everything. This was a merchant's approach. She knew the value of her assets and how to maximize their return. This financial independence gave her a unique form of power. While other women in her position might have faded into obscurity when their protector's affections waned, Venosa's position was secure. When Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, his focus shifted. He had new, younger mistresses, most notably Giulia Farnese. But Venosa wasn't discarded. She transitioned into the role of a respected family elder. Her wealth meant she never had to ask for money. She could support herself and contribute to the family's needs. She had her own household, her own staff, and her own sphere of influence within the city of Rome. She was a known quantity, a person of substance. Her relationship with her children was also shaped by this independence. She was not just a distant, sentimental figure. She was a source of stability and likely practical advice. When her daughter Lucrezia moved to Ferrara to become its duchess, Venosa managed some of Lucrezia's financial affairs in Rome. They trusted her judgment. She had proven over decades that she knew how to handle money and property. Her final act as a businesswoman was her will. It was a masterfully crafted document that cemented her legacy. She left large sums to the church, ensuring she would be remembered as a pious benefactress. This was a canny move in an age when one's eternal soul and public reputation were deeply intertwined. She provided for the upkeep of her tomb and for masses to be said for her soul. But she also took care of her family. She left property and funds to her grandchildren, ensuring that the wealth she had built would pass down through the generations. Even after the Borgia name became synonymous with scandal and their political power evaporated, Vannazza's carefully cultivated fortune endured. She saw the world not just in terms of political alliances and noble titles, but in terms of assets, leases, and revenue. She understood that true security came not from the fickle favor of a pope, but from a deed to a property on a busy Roman street. In a world that gave women few paths to direct power, Vannazza de Catanei found one in business. She was not just a mistress. She was a tycoon. Number 16, what did a woman need to survive in the Borgia court? Adriana de Mila was Pope Alexander VI's third cousin, making her a trusted member of his inner circle. She was given the enormous responsibility of acting as governess and chaperone to his daughter, Lucrezia. And she was also the mother-in-law of Giulia Farnese's brother, Angelo. And later, after Angelo's death, she became the mother-in-law of the Pope's own son, Giafer, when he married her daughter, Sancha of Aragon. This placed her at the nexus of the Borgia, Farnese, and Aragonese families. She was a professional chaperone, a political broker, and a keeper of secrets. Surviving and even thriving in the Borgia court required a specific set of skills that had little to do with noble birth or formal education. It required intelligence, discretion, and an almost preternatural ability to navigate shifting alliances. The life of Adriana de Mila is a case study in exactly what was needed. She was not a Borgia by blood, but she was one of the central female figures in their world, a quiet power behind the scenes. First, a woman needed to be useful. Adriana's utility to Rodrigo Borgia was immense. As a distant relative from his own Spanish background, she was considered family, someone he could trust in a city full of rivals. When his daughter Lucrezia was a young girl, Rodrigo needed someone to raise her, to teach her the etiquette and skills expected of a noblewoman who would one day be a valuable marriage pawn. Adriana de Mila was the perfect candidate. She took charge of Lucrezia's education and upbringing, effectively becoming her surrogate mother. She was a constant presence in Lucrezia's life from her childhood through her first two marriages. Second, a woman needed to be a gatekeeper. Adriana's role was not just to educate Lucrezia, but to guard her. She controlled access to the young girl. Anyone who wanted to see Lucrezia or communicate with her had to go through Adriana. This gave her considerable influence. She was the eyes and ears of the Pope within his own daughter's household. She understood the political value of Lucrezia and the importance of protecting her reputation, at least in the formal sense. Third, a woman needed to be adaptable. Adriana's situation became more complex when Rodrigo Borgia began his affair with the young and stunningly beautiful Giulia Farnese. Instead of seeing Giulia as a rival, Adriana and the Borgias incorporated her into the family structure. In a move that seems bizarre to modern eyes, Giulia was placed in Adriana de Mila's care, living in the same palace as Lucrezia. Adriana became the chaperone and companion to both the Pope's daughter and his new mistress. This arrangement was practical. It kept both women under one roof, under a watchful eye, and it maintained a facade of propriety. Adriana's willingness to accept this role, to manage this complicated and delicate domestic situation, made her indispensable to the Pope. Fourth, a woman needed to be an ambitious family strategist. Adriana was not just serving the Borgias, she was advancing the interests of her own family. She successfully brokered a marriage between her son, Orsino, and Giulia Farnese. This connected her family directly to the Pope's favorite. The arrangement was that Orsino would be the official husband, while Giulia remained the Pope's companion. It was a political and financial transaction. Later, Adriana played a key role in arranging the marriage of her daughter, Sancha of Aragon, to the Pope's youngest son, Giafor Borgia. This marriage was a major political alliance linking the Borgias to the powerful ruling house of Naples. Adriana, through her children's marriages, had woven her family into the very fabric of Borgia power. To survive in this world, a woman had to understand that sentiment had little place in public life. Relationships were transactions. Marriages were alliances. Loyalty was a commodity. Adriana de Mila understood the rules of the game better than almost anyone. She was not the one making the grand public moves, but she was the one managing the household, controlling the flow of information, and ensuring the domestic machinery of the Borgia family ran smoothly. She knew the secrets, she knew who was in favor and who was not, and she used that knowledge to protect her position and promote her family. Her story is less dramatic than Lucrezia's or Giulia's, but it is perhaps more instructive about what it truly took for a woman to hold on to power in Renaissance Rome. It took a quiet, steely resolve and a profound understanding of human nature. Number 15. Why was Giulia Farnese called the Bride of Christ? Giulia Farnese's brother, Alessandro Farnese, was made a cardinal at the age of 25 in 1493, just a year after Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI. This rapid promotion was widely attributed to Giulia's influence with the Pope. Alessandro would go on to have a long and successful career in the Church, eventually becoming Pope Paul III in 1534. His early career was built directly on his sister's connection to the papal throne. The family's rise was so directly tied to Giulia that Roman wits gave Alessandro the nickname Cardinal Petticoat. The nickname La Bella, or the Beautiful, is how Giulia Farnese is often remembered. But the more provocative title she earned in the streets of Rome was Sponsa Christi, which translates to Bride of Christ. This was not a compliment. It was a deeply cynical and biting piece of satire. The Pope was the vicar of Christ on earth. Therefore, the Pope's mistress was, in a manner of speaking, the bride of Christ. It was a way for the people of Rome and the Borgia's many enemies to mock the perceived corruption of Alexander VI's papacy. It pointed directly at the hypocrisy of a Pope sworn to celibacy, openly keeping a beautiful young mistress and enriching her family. Giulia Farnese came from a family of the lower nobility, the Signori of Lazio. They had ambition but lacked the wealth and influence of the great Roman families like the Orsini or the Colonna. Giulia's stunning beauty was their greatest asset. When she was a teenager, she was betrothed to Orsino Orsini, who was related to Adriana de Mila. This brought her into the orbit of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, who was immediately captivated by her. Soon after he became Pope in 1492, the arrangement was solidified. Giulia lived in a palace under the guardianship of Lucrezia's chaperone, Adriana de Mila. Her husband, Orsino, was conveniently absent most of the time, his acquiescence purchased with lands and titles. Giulia's influence was real and tangible. She was not just a companion, she was an advocate for her family's ambitions. The most significant result of her position was the elevation of her brother Alessandro. His appointment as a cardinal was a classic case of nepotism, but it was Giulia who was the catalyst. By securing a red hat for her brother, she ensured the Farnese family's future. The cardinalate was a position for life, a source of immense income and political power. It was the foundation upon which the Farnese dynasty would be built, a dynasty that would produce a pope and the powerful Dukes of Parma. All of this grew from the seeds planted by Giulia's relationship with Alexander VI. She also acted as a petitioner. People who wanted a favor from the Pope, a clerical appointment, a legal pardon, a business concession, would often try to go through Giulia. They would send her letters, offer her gifts, and beg her to intercede with the Holy Father on their behalf. Her surviving correspondence shows that she took this role seriously. She would pass on requests and often secure favorable outcomes for her petitioners. This made her a person of influence in her own right. She was a conduit to power. Her position was, of course, entirely dependent on the Pope. She was not his wife. She had no official title. Her power was soft power, based on personal influence and affection. This made her position precarious. There were moments of tension, such as when she traveled to be with her dying brother, Angelo, against the Pope's wishes. Alexander VI was frantic, writing angry letters demanding her immediate return to Rome. This episode reveals the nature of their relationship. It was one of genuine affection on his part, but also one of possession and control. After the Pope's death in 1503, Giulia's direct line to power was severed. The Borgia family collapsed and their allies scrambled for safety. Giulia, then in her late 20s, had to rely on the power base she had built for her family. She retreated to Carbognano, a castle that had been given to her husband's family by the Borgias. She spent years managing her own lands and affairs and eventually returned to Rome. She arranged a good marriage for her daughter Laura and oversaw her family's continued rise. The foundation laid during her years as the Bride of Christ was strong enough to endure the fall of her protector. She died in 1524, a wealthy and respected noblewoman. She had successfully translated her beauty and her controversial relationship into lasting dynastic power for the Farnese family. Number 14, could a marriage alliance destroy a kingdom? Sancha of Aragon was the illegitimate daughter of King Alfonso II of Naples. Her marriage to Joffre Borgia was part of a major treaty in 1494 that allied the papacy with the Kingdom of Naples against French invasion. As part of the deal, Sancha's brother Alfonso was married to a Neapolitan princess, and her father, the King of Naples, paid a huge dowry and gave Giaffre the title of Prince of Squillace. This marriage was, from the very beginning, a purely political instrument. The story of Sancha of Aragon and Giaffre Borgia is a prime example of how a marriage intended to cement a political alliance could instead become a source of instability and conflict. Sancha was a pawn in a great game between the Borgias in Rome and the ruling house of Aragon in Naples. She was spirited, beautiful, and accustomed to the sophisticated Neapolitan court. She was thrust into the turbulent world of Rome and married to the youngest and least impressive of the Borgia brothers, Giaffre, who was only about 13 years old at the time of their marriage. Sancha was a few years older and far more worldly. The alliance itself was a high-stakes gamble. King Ferrante of Naples feared the ambitions of King Charles V of France, who had a historic claim to the Neapolitan throne. Pope Alexander VI also feared a powerful French army marching through Italy, as it would threaten his own control over the Papal States. The marriage of Sancha and Giaffre was meant to be the glue that held the Rome-Naples axis together. It was a public declaration that the two powers were united, but the personal dynamics of the marriage were a disaster. Sancha was reportedly unimpressed with her young husband. The Roman court, dominated by the Spanish Borgias, was a hotbed of intrigue. Rumors quickly began to swirl around Sancha. She was said to be overly familiar with her husband's older brothers, the charismatic and ruthless Cesare and the arrogant Juan. In whispers in the diaries of contemporary observers like Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, hinted at inappropriate relationships. Whether these rumors were true or simply malicious gossip aimed at discrediting the Borgias and their allies is impossible to know for certain. What is certain is that the rumors themselves were politically damaging. The political alliance the marriage was meant to secure soon fell apart. The French did invade Italy in 1494. The Neapolitan kingdom, despite its alliance with the Pope, was unable to withstand the French army. Sancha's family was deposed and she became a political refugee living in Rome, her status as a princess of a ruling house suddenly gone. The very foundation of her marriage had crumbled. This left Sancha in an impossible position. She was the Princess of Squillace, a title in a kingdom that was now controlled by her family's enemies. Her relationship with the Borgias became strained. At one point, she and her sister-in-law, Lucrezia, were placed under a form of house arrest in Rome by Pope Alexander VI, who suspected them of political maneuvering against him. The situation grew even more tense after the mysterious end of Lucrezia's second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, who was Sancha's brother. Alfonso was from the Neapolitan royal family. His demise, which was widely blamed on Cesare Borgia, effectively severed the last friendly tie between the Borgias and the House of Aragon. Sancha was now the sister of a man her brother-in-law had allegedly disposed of, married to another brother-in-law she did not respect, and living under the roof of a pope who was now politically aligned with France, the enemy of her homeland. Sancha's marriage, once a symbol of a grand alliance, had become a personal and political trap. After Pope Alexander VI's death and the collapse of Borgia power, Sancha was finally able to leave Rome. She returned to Naples with her husband Giafer, but they lived separately. She had survived the Borgias, but her life had been completely derailed by the political marriage she had been forced into. The alliance didn't just fail, it curdled into suspicion and animosity, contributing to the instability that allowed foreign powers to treat Italy as their battlefield. The marriage that was supposed to save a kingdom became a footnote in its downfall. Number 13, what really happened to Lucrezia's second husband. Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Bisegli, was 17 years old when he married the 18-year-old Lucrezia Borgia in 1498. He was the illegitimate son of King Alfonso II of Naples. The marriage was a political move by Pope Alexander VI to shift his alliances away from France and toward the Spanish-backed powers in Naples. Alfonso was described as handsome and charming, and by all accounts, he and Lucrezia developed a genuine affection for each other. They had one child together, a son named Rodrigo. The story of Lucrezia's marriage to Alfonso of Aragon is the most tragic chapter of her young life. It shows how her personal happiness was completely subordinate to the political ambitions of her father and brother, Cesare. This was not a marriage of convenience that soured. It was a happy marriage that was deliberately destroyed by a shift in political winds. By 1499, the political landscape of Italy had changed dramatically. The Borgias, led by the increasingly powerful Cesare, decided to abandon their alliance with Naples and throw in their lot with the new King of France, Louis XII. The French king had promised to help Cesare carve out a duchy for himself in the Romagna region of Italy. Suddenly, Lucrezia's Neapolitan husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was no longer a political asset. He was a political liability. He was a living symbol of a discarded alliance and a representative of a family that was now the enemy of Cesare's new French patrons. The pressure on Alfonso became immense. He was in Rome, surrounded by the power of the Borgias, who were now allied with his family's enemies. Fearing for his life, he fled Rome in August 1499. Lucrezia, who was pregnant at the time, was heartbroken. The Pope sent messengers to persuade Alfonso to return, guaranteeing his safety. Eventually, Alfonso was convinced and returned to his wife in Rome. For a short time, they were reunited. Their son, Rodrigo of Aragon, was born in November 1499, but the political situation did not improve. Cesare Borgia's power was growing daily, and he was known for his ruthlessness. On the evening of July 15, 1500, as Alfonso was walking from the Vatican, he was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica by a group of armed men. He was severely wounded, but managed to stagger back into the papal apartments. He was carried to his rooms where Lucrezia and his sister Sancha nursed him. The Pope, seemingly distraught, ordered a full investigation and placed a heavy guard on Alfonso's chambers. For about a month, Alfonso began to recover. Lucrezia and Sancha stayed by his side, preparing his food themselves for fear of poison. But the political reality had not changed. Alfonso was still an obstacle to Cesare Borgia's plans. On August 18, 1500, the end came. According to the most reliable contemporary accounts, a group of men, led by Cesare's trusted lieutenant Michelotto Corella, entered Alfonso's room. They ordered Lucrezia and Sancha to leave. A short time later, Alfonso's life came to an end. The official story was that he had suffered a relapse from his earlier injuries. No one believed it. The Venetian ambassador wrote home that Cesare Borgia had openly boasted of his involvement, claiming that Alfonso had been plotting against him. Lucrezia was devastated. She was sent to the city of Nepi to mourn away from the politics of Rome. Her happy marriage was over, her husband was gone, and her son was now fatherless. The episode was a brutal demonstration of Borgia power. It showed that nothing, not even the happiness of the Pope's own daughter, would be allowed to stand in the way of Cesare's ambition. Lucrezia was a widow at 20, her brief period of personal contentment shattered by the cold, hard logic of dynastic politics. Number 12. Did Lucrezia Borgia actually govern a city? In the summer of 1499, while her husband Alfonso of Aragon was away from Rome, Pope Alexander VI appointed his 19-year-old daughter Lucrezia as the governor of Spoleto. This was not a ceremonial title. Spoleto was a strategically important city in Umbria, part of the Papal States. she was given full administrative powers. Historical records from the city of Spoleto confirm her arrival and her official actions. She received ambassadors, heard legal cases, and issued decrees. This was an unprecedented level of public responsibility for a woman of her age, especially for the daughter of a pope. The idea of Lucrezia Borgia as a serious political administrator clashes with her popular image as a femme fatale. But the historical evidence shows that her father had great confidence in her abilities. Her appointment as governor of Spoleto was a test, and by all accounts, she passed it with flying colors. When she arrived in Spoleto, she was not just a figurehead. She brought with her a retinue of experienced officials, but she was the one in charge. The city archives contain documents that detail her activities. One of her first acts was to appoint a new castellan for the city's fortress, a key military and administrative position. This shows she was immediately engaged in the practicalities of governance. She also presided over the city's council meetings. Her primary task was to bring peace and order to a region that was often troubled by feuds between rival noble families. Her approach was not to use force, but to use diplomacy and justice. She heard petitions from her subjects directly. She acted as a judge, settling disputes over land and property. The chronicles of the time praise her for her fairness and her ability to mediate conflicts. Her tenure was remembered as a period of calm and good government. This was more than just a summer job. It was a crucial part of her political education. Her father and brother were preparing her for a future role as the wife of a ruling duke. They needed her to understand the mechanics of power, how to manage a territory, and how to command the respect of her subjects. Her time in Spoleto was a practical apprenticeship. It demonstrated that she was more than just a pretty face to be used in a marriage negotiation. She had a sharp mind and a talent for administration. Later, in 1501, during another of the Pope's absences from Rome, he took an even more extraordinary step. He left Lucrezia in the Vatican with the authority to open his correspondence and handle some of his affairs. The papal master of ceremonies, Johann Burchard, noted this in his diary with a tone of shock and disapproval. He wrote that she was authorized to open letters and that a cardinal was instructed to advise her, but the decision-making power, even on a limited basis, was hers. For the Pope to entrust his daughter with access to the sensitive diplomatic mail of the Holy See was a sign of his immense trust in her discretion and intelligence. These episodes are crucial to understanding the real Lucrezia Borgia. The TV shows and novels often portray her as either a helpless victim or a willing participant in her family's dark deeds. The historical record suggests a third option, a highly intelligent and capable woman who is being carefully trained for a position of power. Her father did not just see her as a pawn. He saw her as a player, someone who could be trusted with real responsibility. Her successful governance of Spoleto was the first clear proof that she was more than ready for the role she would later play as the Duchess of Ferrara. Number 11, how do you annul? A marriage on grounds of a secret. The annulment of Lucrezia Borgia's first marriage to Giovanni Sforza in 1497 was granted on the grounds of non-consummation. Sforza was forced to sign documents testifying to this, a deeply humiliating public admission for a Renaissance nobleman. To prove the family's claim, the Borgias offered to have Lucrezia publicly examined by matrons to verify her virginity. Giovanni Sforza, in his fury and humiliation, retaliated by spreading the now infamous rumor that the real reason for the annulment was that her father, Pope Alexander VI, wanted her for himself. This was the origin of one of the darkest stains on the Borgia reputation. Lucrezia Borgia was married for the first time at the age of 13. Her husband, Giovanni Sforza, was the lord of Pesaro and a member of the powerful Sforza clan that ruled Milan. Like all of her marriages, it was a political alliance. At the time, the Borgias needed a connection to the rulers of northern Italy. Lucrezia moved to Pesaro to live with her husband, but by 1497, 4 years into the marriage, the political winds had shifted. The Sforzas of Milan were no longer useful allies to the Borgias. In fact, they were becoming obstacles. Pope Alexander VI and his son Cesar decided that Lucrezia needed to be free to marry someone else, someone who could bring them a more advantageous alliance. The problem was she was already married. Divorce, as we know it, did not exist. The only way to dissolve a valid marriage was through an annulment, a declaration by the church that the marriage had never been valid in the first place. The Borgias needed a reason, a legal justification for the annulment. They chose the grounds of non-consummation. This was a standard, if difficult to prove, reason for an annulment in canon law. A marriage was considered a contract that was sealed by the physical union of the couple. If that union had not occurred, the church could declare the marriage null. The process was a public and brutal affair. Giovanni Sforza was pressured to agree to the annulment. He initially resisted. He knew that agreeing would make him a laughingstock. To admit that he had been unable to consummate his marriage was an attack on his manhood and his honor. The Borgias applied immense pressure. They threatened to strip him of his lands and titles. His own powerful Sforza relatives in Milan, not wanting to start a war with the Pope, advised him to give in. Cornered, Sforza finally agreed. He was made to sign papers attesting that for 4 years he had been married to Lucrezia but had never had a physical relationship with her. The Borgia side, to add weight to their claim, made the offer of a physical examination of Lucrezia. It's unclear if this examination ever actually took place, but the public offer was a powerful piece of theater designed to prove their case. The annulment was granted. Lucrezia was officially declared a virgin, free to marry again, but the damage was done. Giovanni Sforza, stripped of his wife and his dignity, lashed out in the only way he could. He started a rumor campaign. He told anyone who would listen, including his powerful cousins, that the reason the Pope wanted Lucrezia back was not for a new political marriage, but for incestuous reasons. This was a masterful piece of political revenge. It was a charge so shocking and so vile that it was impossible to disprove. It stained the Borgia name permanently. The rumor spread like wildfire through the courts of Italy, fueled by the Borgia's many enemies who were eager to believe the worst about the Spanish upstarts. It was this accusation, born out of the humiliation of a forced annulment, that became the cornerstone of the black legend of the Borgia family. The annulment process, designed to free Lucrezia for another political move, ended up imprisoning her in a web of slander that follows her to this day. Number 10. Who was the mysterious Roman infant? In 1501, 2 papal bulls or official decrees were issued on the same day. The first one acknowledged a 3-year-old boy named Giovanni Borgia as the illegitimate son of Cesare Borgia. The second secret bull, issued on the same day but not made public, acknowledged the same child as the son of Pope Alexander VI himself. This contradictory and highly unusual pair of documents created a mystery that has never been fully solved. The child became known as the Infans Romanus, or the Roman infant. He was granted the Duchy of Nepi and a significant income. The story of the Infans Romanus is one of the most baffling episodes in the Borgia saga. It occurred in the period between the end of Lucrezia's marriage to Giovanni Sforza and her marriage to Alfonso of Aragon. During this time, there were rumors that Lucrezia had given birth to a secret child. The timing of Giovanni Borgia's appearance and the extreme lengths the Pope went to in order to legitimize and provide for him has led many historians to speculate about his parentage. Let's break down the facts. A child, Giovanni Borgia, suddenly appears on the scene around 1501, said to be about 3 years old. Pope Alexander VI, who was in his late 60s, takes an extraordinary interest in the boy's future. He issues 2 separate legal documents to establish the boy's identity and inheritance. The first bull was the public story. It declared that Giovanni was the son of Cesare Borgia, who was at the height of his power. This was plausible, if a little irregular. The second bull was a secret, a political time bomb. In it, Alexander VI claimed paternity himself. Why would he do this? One theory is that by claiming the child as his own, he could grant him ducal titles and lands more easily and securely than if the child were merely the son of Cesare. A pope's son, in the twisted logic of the Borgia court, might have a stronger legal claim to papal grants than a pope's grandson. The existence of these 2 contradictory documents created immediate confusion and fueled gossip. Who was the mother? The bull's name, a certain unmarried woman, which was a standard legal phrase that revealed nothing. But the rumors immediately pointed to Lucrezia. The timing seemed to fit. The annulment from Sforza was in 1497. The child was said to be born around 1498. This was a period when Lucrezia was in Rome and unmarried. The secrecy surrounding the child's birth and the Pope's deep personal investment in him made many people suspect that Lucrezia was the mother. If Lucrezia was the mother, who was the father, the dark rumors, started by Giovanni Sforza, suggested an incestuous relationship with either her father or her brother. The existence of the two papal bulls, one naming Cesare as the father, the other naming Alexander, seemed to give credence to these horrific rumors. It was as if the Borgias themselves couldn't decide which story to stick with. However, there are other possibilities. The child's mother could have been an unknown Roman woman with whom either Alexander or Cesare had a brief affair. The elaborate legal maneuvers might have simply been a way to ensure the child was well provided for, a typical Borgia trait. Alexander was always dedicated to securing the future of his children and grandchildren. Whatever the truth, the infans Romanus became part of Lucrezia's life. After her father's death, Lucrezia, then the Duchess of Ferrara, brought young Giovanni Borgia to live with her. He was raised in the Ferrarese court alongside her own legitimate children with Alfonso d'Este. She referred to him as her half-brother, sticking to the public story that he was Cesare's son. This act of bringing the boy into her own household was one of compassion, but it also kept the old rumors alive. The mystery of the Roman infant, born of secret parentage and legitimized by contradictory papal decrees, remains a perfect symbol of the tangled, secretive, and often scandalous world of the Borgia family. Number 9 was Lucrezia's third marriage her escape or her masterpiece. The negotiations for Lucrezia Borgia's marriage to Alfonso d'Este, the heir to the Duchy of Ferrara, were incredibly difficult. Duke Ercole d'Este, Alfonso's father, was deeply resistant to the match. He considered the Borgias to be Spanish upstarts with a terrible reputation. Pope Alexander VI was so determined to make the alliance happen that he offered an enormous dowry of 200,000 ducats, a colossal sum. He also canceled a debt the Este family owed to the church and threw in valuable territories and titles. The Duke of Ferrara held out for every last concession, essentially making the Pope pay an exorbitant price for the privilege of having his daughter join one of Italy's oldest and most respected noble families. By 1501, Lucrezia was a 21-year-old widow. Her first marriage had ended in a humiliating annulment, and her second had ended with her husband's violent death at the hands of her own family. Her name was associated with the worst rumors imaginable. For her, a third marriage was not just a political move, it was a chance at a new life. A chance to escape the toxic environment of Rome and the suffocating control of her father and brother. The marriage to Alfonso d'Este was her golden opportunity. The Este court of Ferrara was the complete opposite of Borgia Rome. Established dynasty famous for its culture, its learning, and its military prowess. The Estes were true Renaissance princes, patrons of art and literature, with a reputation for piety and good government. To marry into this family would be a huge step up for Lucrezia. It would give her legitimacy and security that she had never known. The negotiation process was a masterclass in political hardball. Duke Ercole d'Este drove a very hard bargain. He listed his objections to Lucrezia, her illegitimate birth, though she was legitimized by the Pope, her scandalous reputation, and her previous 2 failed marriages. These were all valid points, but they were also negotiating tactics. For every objection he raised, the Pope raised the price. The dowry was astronomical. The political concessions were huge. Alexander VI was essentially using the full power and wealth of the papacy to buy his daughter a respectable future. He needed this alliance with Ferrara to secure his and Cesare's power in central Italy. Lucrezia herself played an active role. She corresponded with her future father-in-law, trying to present herself as a pious and suitable bride. She was no longer a passive teenager being told who to marry. She understood the stakes. This marriage was her ticket out. When the deal was finally struck, Lucrezia's journey from Rome to Ferrara in 1502 was one of the most magnificent spectacles of the Renaissance. It was a grand procession that moved slowly up the Italian peninsula, a moving display of Borgia wealth and power. When she arrived in Ferrara, she was greeted with days of feasts, tournaments, and theatrical performances. The Este family, having extracted their price, now welcomed her as their future duchess. This marriage was both an escape and a masterpiece. It was an escape from the direct control of her family and the dangerous political world of Rome, where her life and happiness were always secondary to Cesare's ambitions. In Ferrara, she would be the Duchess, a position with its own power and responsibilities, far from the daily intrigues of the Vatican. It was also a masterpiece of political and social maneuvering. For the Borgias, it was the pinnacle of their dynastic ambitions. They had successfully married their daughter into one of the most prestigious families in Italy. For Lucrezia, it was the beginning of her transformation. She left Rome with a dark reputation, a woman tainted by scandal. She arrived in Ferrara determined to become the perfect Renaissance princess. And to a remarkable degree, she succeeded. This marriage was not just another political arrangement. It was the moment Lucrezia Borgia began to take control of her own story. Number 8. How did Lucrezia transform from a political pawn to a respected duchess? As Duchess of Ferrara, Lucrezia Borgia established her own court, which became a major cultural center. She was a significant patron of the arts, supporting poets like Ludovico Ariosto, who praised her in his epic poem Orlando Furioso, and artists like Titian. She also took a keen interest in the economic well-being of her new home. She initiated large-scale land reclamation and drainage projects to turn marshland into productive farmland, a massive infrastructure project that benefited the duchy for generations. When Lucrezia arrived in Ferrara, she faced a difficult situation. The Este family was wary of her. The court was full of people who believed the terrible rumors about her past. Her husband, Alfonso, was known to be a stern, military-minded man, not given to warmth or romance. She could have easily been isolated and ignored. Instead, she methodically and intelligently built a new life and a new reputation for herself. Her first step was to embrace the role of Duchess completely. She understood that her primary duty was to produce an heir for the d'Este dynasty. She gave birth to several children, including the future Duke Urkel II, securing the succession and fulfilling her most important obligation. This immediately strengthened her position within the family and the state. Next, she cultivated a reputation for piety and charity. This was a direct counterpoint to the image of the decadent, corrupt Borgia from Rome. She founded convents and supported religious institutions. She was known for her generosity to the poor. In a time of frequent famine and hardship, she organized relief efforts. These were not just public relations stunts. They were genuine acts that earned her the affection and loyalty of the people of Ferrara. They began to see her not as a foreign Borgia, but as their duchess. She also proved to be a capable political partner to her husband. When Alfonso d'Este was away from Ferrara on military campaigns, which was often, he left Lucrezia in charge as regent. She governed the duchy in his absence, handling administrative tasks, meeting with advisors, and making political decisions. She had learned well during her time as governor of Spoleto. The Ferrarese archives contain her letters and decrees from these periods, showing a woman who was fully engaged in the business of the state. Her husband trusted her judgment completely. Her court became a beacon of Renaissance culture. She was fluent in several languages, well-read, and had a passion for music and dance. She created an environment that attracted some of the greatest creative minds of the age. The poet Pietro Bembo was a devoted admirer. Ariosto became a lifelong friend. By patronizing these artists and thinkers, she enhanced the prestige of Ferrara and established herself as a true Renaissance princess, a woman of taste and intellect. The death of her father, Pope Alexander VI, in 1503 was a critical turning point. The Borgia Empire collapsed overnight. Her brother Cesare became a fugitive, his power gone. Lucrezia was in Ferrara, far from the chaos in Rome. Her marriage, which her father had paid so dearly for, was now her shield. The Este family protected her. Her identity was now tied to Ferrara, not to the fallen Borgias. She had successfully managed the transition. Over the years, she built a life that was entirely her own. She was a devoted mother, a respected ruler, a patron of the arts, and a pious benefactor. She even became a successful businesswoman, managing her own finances and investing in projects like the land reclamation program. By the time of her death in 1519, at the age of 39, she was genuinely mourned by the people of Ferrara. She had completely rewritten her own story. The scandalous girl from Rome had transformed herself into one of the most respected duchesses of the Italian Renaissance. Number 7, could a Borgia woman find piety after a life of politics? In her later years as Duchess of Ferrara, Lucrezia Borgia became deeply religious. She joined the Third Order of St. Francis, a lay religious order for people who wanted to live a more pious life without entering a convent. After her death, it was discovered that she had worn a hair shirt, a coarse garment worn under her clothes as a form of penance for many years. She was buried in the habit of a Franciscan tertiary in the convent of Corpus Domini in Ferrara, alongside other members of the Este family. The final years of Lucrezia's life present a stark contrast to her tumultuous youth. The woman who had been a pawn in the power games of popes and kings turned inward, seeking solace and meaning in faith. This transformation was not a sudden conversion, but a gradual process that defined her life in Ferrara. Life in the 16th century was fragile. Lucrezia endured great personal loss. She lost several children in infancy or early childhood. The grief from these losses seems to have deepened her religious devotion. She also witnessed immense political turmoil and the constant threat of war. Her husband, Alfonso, was excommunicated by her father's successor, Pope Julius II, a sworn enemy of the Borgias. Ferrara was under constant threat. In this environment of uncertainty and sorrow, her faith became her anchor. Joining the Third Order of St. Francis was a significant step. It was a way for her to dedicate her life to God while still fulfilling her duties as a wife, mother, and duchess. It involved a commitment to prayer, simplicity, and charity. Her decision to wear a hair shirt is even more telling. This was a secret act of personal piety, not for public display. It suggests a deep-seated need for penance, perhaps for the sins of her family or for the turbulent events of her own past. It was a way of mortifying the flesh to purify the soul, a common practice for the deeply devout in that era. Her charitable work also intensified. She founded and endowed the convent of San Bernardino and used her own funds to support hospitals and aid the poor. Her correspondence from this period is filled with discussions of religious matters. She developed a close relationship with her spiritual advisors and spent more and more time in prayer and contemplation. When she died in 1519, following complications from childbirth, her husband, Alfonso d'Este, a man not known for his emotional displays, wrote a letter to his nephew that expressed his profound grief. He wrote that he could not write without weeping, so great was his sorrow at being deprived of so sweet and dear a companion. He praised her wisdom and her good character. This was the ultimate testament to her transformation. The husband, who had been forced to marry the scandalous Borgia princess, now mourned her as the beloved heart of his life and his court. Her choice of burial was her final statement. She was not interred in a grand, ostentatious tomb celebrating her ducal status. Instead, she chose the simple cemetery of the convent of Corpus Domini to be buried in the humble habit of a Franciscan tertiary. It was a final rejection of the worldly power and glamour that had defined her family's name. She had started her life as Lucrezia Borgia, a name synonymous with power and scandal. She ended it as Lucrezia d'Este, Duchess of Ferrara, remembered for her piety, her charity, and her quiet strength. She had found a different kind of power, not in politics, but in faith. Number 6, what was the true source of the Borgia women's wealth? Lucrezia Borgia's dowry for her third marriage was 200,000 ducats. To put that in perspective, a skilled craftsman in Rome at the time might earn 30 to 50 ducats a year. The annual income of a wealthy banking family like the Medici might be around 100,000 ducats. Her dowry alone was a fortune that could fund an army or build a cathedral. This money did not come from ancient family lands. It was newly acquired wealth funneled through the papacy. Venosa de Catanei's property empire was built on a similar foundation of papal funds, which she then skillfully invested. The wealth of the Borgia women was directly tied to one source, the papacy. Rodrigo Borgia, as a cardinal and later as Pope Alexander VI, controlled one of the wealthiest institutions in Europe. The church had vast landholdings, collected tithes and taxes from across Christendom, and charged fees for all manner of spiritual and administrative services. This river of gold flowed into Rome, and Alexander VI was a master at diverting it to his family. Lucrezia's enormous dowry is the most obvious example. The money came directly from the papal treasury. It was, in essence, the church paying to secure a political alliance for the Pope's family. This was a controversial but not entirely uncommon practice. Popes of the era often acted like secular kings, using the church's resources to advance their dynastic ambitions. The Borgias just did it more brazenly and on a grander scale than most, but the wealth was not just in cash. It was in land and titles. When Lucrezia married Alfonso of Aragon, she was given the city of Sermoneta as part of her dowry. This wasn't just a gift of land, it was the gift of a fiefdom, complete with its own population, castles, and, most importantly, tax revenues. The city was taken from a rival family, the Caetani, and handed over to Lucrezia. She became its feudal lord. This was real, tangible power and a source of independent income. Venosa de Catanei's fortune also originated with Rodrigo. He settled a comfortable income on her and provided the initial capital for her business ventures. But the key to her success was her own skill in turning that capital into a much larger self-sustaining enterprise. She bought property, a stable and lucrative investment in a growing city like Rome. She understood that while a man's favor could be temporary, ownership of an inn on a busy street was permanent. Her wealth was a mix of Borgia patronage and her own sharp business sense. Giulia Farnese and her family also benefited immensely. While Giulia herself was given jewels and luxurious accommodations, the real wealth was transferred to her family. Her brother's cardinalate came with numerous beneficent churches, monasteries, and lands that provided a steady and substantial income. The Farnese family was granted lands and titles that elevated them from minor nobility to major players in central Italy. Giulia's personal relationship with the Pope was leveraged to create lasting generational wealth for her entire clan. So, the source of the wealth was the papacy, but it was distributed and used in different ways. For Lucrezia, it was used to secure her marriages and provide her with her own territories. For Venosa, it was the seed money for a real estate empire. For Giulia, it was the leverage to build a dynasty for her family. The Borgia women were not just passive recipients of this wealth. They understood its power and, in their own ways, used it to build security and influence in a world that offered them few other paths to either. Number 5. How did letters shape the Borgia legacy? Over 50 personal letters between Lucrezia Borgia and the poet Pietro Bembo survive. They are unusually intimate for the period, filled with expressions of deep affection. In one famous gesture, Lucrezia sent Bembo a lock of her blonde hair, which she kept in a precious casket. This lock of hair, along with the letters, is now preserved in the Ambrosian Library in Milan. This correspondence has shaped our view of Lucrezia as a cultured and passionate woman, a stark contrast to the political monster her enemies described. The story of the Borgia women, particularly Lucrezia, would be much poorer without their surviving letters. In an age before mass media, letters were the primary means of communication over long distances. They were used for diplomacy, for business, and for personal connection. For historians, these documents are a window into their minds, revealing their personalities, their concerns, and their relationships in their own words. Lucrezia's correspondence is particularly rich. We have letters she wrote to her father, her brother, her husbands, her mother, and her friends. Her letters to her father, Pope Alexander VI, show a mix of filial duty and genuine affection. They discuss politics, family matters, and personal health. Her letters from her time as Duchess of Ferrara show her evolution into a confident and capable ruler. She writes to her husband about managing the state in his absence, giving detailed reports on administrative matters. These are not the letters of a frivolous or empty-headed woman. They are the work of a serious and engaged administrator. The letters to her mother, Venosa, reveal a warm and enduring bond. They exchange news and express concern for each other's well-being, painting a picture of a normal, loving mother-daughter relationship that cuts through the myth of the monstrous Borgia family. Then there is the correspondence with Pietro Bembo. These letters are different. They are more personal, more emotional. They speak of a deep intellectual and spiritual connection. Bembo was one of the leading literary figures of his time, and his admiration for Lucrezia was profound. Whether their relationship was a true romance or a highly stylized courtly friendship is debated by historians. But the letters themselves show a side of Lucrezia that has often overlooked: her intellect, her sensitivity, and her capacity for deep emotional connection. This correspondence has been instrumental in the modern reevaluation of her character. Letters also shaped their legacy in a negative way. The reports sent home by ambassadors and envoys in Rome and Ferrara are a major source for the Borgia legend. The Venetian ambassadors, in particular, were sharp-eyed observers and relentless gossips. Their dispatches are filled with details of court life, political maneuvers, and, of course, scandal. They reported the rumors about Giovanni Sforza's annulment, the whispers about the Infans Romanus, and the shock surrounding the end of Alfonso of Aragon. These official reports, written by men who were often political opponents of the Borgias, were taken as fact and helped solidify the family's dark reputation throughout Europe. The diary of Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, is another crucial written source. His detailed, deadpan accounts of events in the Vatican, including the lavish parties and the political intrigues, have been mined for centuries for evidence of Borgia depravity. While Burchard was an eyewitness, he was also a stickler for protocol and clearly disapproved of the Borgias' flamboyant style. His writings are not unbiased, but they provide an invaluable, if sometimes jaundiced, view from inside the papal court. Without these written records, the personal letters, the diplomatic dispatches, the private diaries, the Borgia women would be little more than one-dimensional figures of myth. Their letters allow us to hear their voices, to understand their struggles, and to see them as complex human beings navigating an extraordinary and dangerous world. Number 4. Did Lucrezia's children escape the Borgia shadow? Lucrezia Borgia's eldest son, Rodrigo of Aragon, born from her tragic marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, was given the title Duke of Bisceglie. After his father's demise, he was raised by his mother in Ferrara. However, he died in 1512 at the age of just 12. Her second son, Ercole II d'Este, born from her successful marriage to Alfonso d'Este, had a very different fate. He became the Duke of Ferrara, Modena, and Reggio in 1534 and ruled for 25 years. He married Renee of France, daughter of King Louis XXI, and his daughters married into the powerful Farnese and Gonzaga families. He was a successful and respected ruler, fully integrated into the Italian aristocracy. The fate of Lucrezia's children is the ultimate measure of her success in transforming her own life and legacy. Her primary duty as Duchess of Ferrara was to produce heirs who would carry on the d'Este line. In this, she succeeded, but her children's lives were touched by both the Borgia and Este legacies. Her firstborn, Rodrigo of Aragon, was a living reminder of her Roman past. He was the son of her murdered Neapolitan husband, a Borgia on his mother's side and an Aragon on his father's. He was raised in Ferrara, but he was an outsider. The Este family had no reason to promote him. His claims were to titles in the south of Italy, not in the north. His early death, while a personal tragedy for Lucrezia, conveniently solved a potentially awkward dynastic problem for the Este family. He never had the chance to escape the Borgia shadow because his life was cut short. Her children with Alfonso d'Este were another story entirely. They were Estes, heirs to one of Italy's great duchies. Her eldest surviving son, Ercole II, became a major figure in 16th century Italian politics. He was a patron of the arts like his parents, but he also had to navigate the treacherous waters of the Italian wars and the Protestant Reformation. His marriage to a French princess solidified Ferrara's traditional alliance with France. He was a cautious and pragmatic ruler who successfully preserved his state's independence against the ambitions of the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire. The Borgia name was part of his ancestry, but it did not define him. He was Duke of Ferrara, a d'Este through and through. Lucrezia had another son, Ippolito II d'Este, who pursued a career in the church, much like the Borgias of a previous generation. He became a cardinal at a young age thanks to his family's influence. He was an incredibly wealthy and powerful figure, a major patron of the arts, who was responsible for building the magnificent Villa d'Este at Tivoli, famous for its spectacular gardens and fountains. He was a candidate for the papacy several times, though he never succeeded. In Ippolito, one can see a blending of the Borgia and Este traditions, the ambition and love of luxury reminiscent of his Borgia grandfather, combined with the refined cultural patronage of the Estes. Lucrezia's children, particularly her Este children, did more than escape the Borgia shadow. They absorbed and legitimized it. Through their successful careers as rulers and churchmen, the controversial blood of the Borghese was woven into the tapestry of the Italian high nobility. Lucrezia, by securing the marriage to Alfonso d'Este and raising her children as true Estes, had ensured that her family line would not just survive the fall of the Borgias, but would thrive for generations to come. It was her final and most lasting victory. Number 3, what happened to Giulia Farnese after the Pope's death. After 1503, when Pope Alexander VI died, Giulia Farnese, then about 29 years old, left Rome and took control of her own destiny. She became the ruler of Carbagnano, a fiefdom that the Pope had granted to her husband's family. She lived there for nearly 2 decades, managing the town's affairs and her own estates. In 1506, she successfully arranged the marriage of her daughter Laura to Niccolo della Rovere, who was the nephew of the new Pope, Julius II, the sworn enemy of the Borgias. This marriage was a political masterstroke that secured her family's position in the new Roman power structure. Giulia Farnese's story did not end with the death of her papal protector. In many ways, her most impressive achievements came afterward. While the Borgia family was crumbling, Giulia demonstrated a remarkable talent for political survival and family advancement. She did not fade into obscurity. She pivoted. Her first move was to secure her own territory. She took up residence in the castle of Carbagnano and administered it as its feudal lady. She was no longer just the Pope's beautiful companion. She was a ruler in her own right, responsible for the laws, finances, and defense of her small state. This gave her a power base that was independent of both the fallen Borgias and her estranged husband. Her greatest strategic move was the marriage of her daughter Laura. Laura's parentage was a subject of gossip. Many believed she was the Pope's daughter, not her husband's. Regardless, Giulia used her daughter's marriage to build a bridge to the new power in Rome. Pope Julius II, Giuliano della Rovere, was a bitter enemy of the Borgias and had spent years in exile during Alexander VI's reign. By marrying her daughter to the new Pope's nephew, Giulia allied the Farnese family with their former rivals. It was a stunningly pragmatic move that showed she understood that in Italian politics there were no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. This alliance protected the Farnese family from any potential retribution and ensured their continued influence in Rome. In her later years, Giulia moved back to Rome. She was a wealthy and respected woman, the head of her own household. She died in 1524, in her early 50s. Her will shows that she had accumulated a considerable personal fortune. Her legacy lived on most powerfully through her brother, Alessandro Farnese. The cardinal's hat that Giulia had helped him secure in his youth was the key to his entire career. He navigated the complex politics of the Vatican for decades, and in 1534, 10 years after Giulia's death, he was elected Pope Paul III. As Pope, he was a major figure of the Counter-Reformation, and he used his power to make his family a ruling dynasty. He made his son the Duke of Parma and Piacenza, establishing the Farnese family as one of the great princely houses of Italy, a position they would hold for centuries. All of this was built on the foundation that Giulia had laid. Her relationship with Pope Alexander VI had given her family their start. Her political savvy after his death had protected them and allowed them to prosper. Giulia Farnese, the Bride of Christ, proved to be one of the most effective political operators of her time. She turned a scandalous reputation into a dynasty. Number 2, how did Vannazza secure her family's future when the Borgia power crumbled? Venosa de Catani died in 1518, 15 years after the death of Pope Alexander VI. She was 76 years old and had outlived all four of her famous children except for Lucrezia, who would die the following year. In her will, she left her considerable fortune, built from her Roman property empire, primarily to religious charities and to her grandchildren. Her funeral was attended by members of the papal court and the Roman nobility, a sign of the deep respect she had earned as a wealthy and pious member of Roman society. When the Borgia power structure collapsed in 1503 with the death of Pope Alexander VI, many of the family's associates and allies suffered. And Cesare lost his lands and his power. The Borgias' enemies returned to Rome, seeking revenge. It was a time of chaos and retribution. Yet, through it all, Venosa de Catane remained untouched. Her position and her wealth were secure. How did she manage this? The key was that her power was not political, it was economic. Her fortune was not based on titles or offices that could be stripped away by a new pope. It was based on real estate, on inns and houses in the heart of Rome. These were her personal property, legally registered and managed as a private business. While Cesare's duchy in the Romagna was a political creation that dissolved without the Pope's backing, Venosa's ownership of the Albergo del Sole was a solid, tangible asset. During the turbulent years after 1503, Venosa kept a low profile. She was no longer at the center of papal politics. She was a private citizen, a wealthy widow, and businesswoman. She focused on managing her properties and on her charitable activities. This was a wise strategy. By presenting herself as a pious and non-political figure, she gave the Borgias' enemies no reason to target her. She was not a threat to anyone. Her final years were dedicated to cementing her legacy. Like many wealthy people of the era, she became a major benefactor of the church. She endowed chapels, donated to hospitals, and joined religious confraternities. This was partly an expression of genuine faith, but it was also a very practical way to launder a reputation. By becoming known as a great philanthropist, she ensured that she would be remembered in Rome not as the Pope's controversial mistress, but as a respectable and devout matron. Her will was her final act of shrewd planning. She left a significant portion of her estate to the church, which guaranteed that the religious authorities would have an interest in seeing her will executed properly. But she also provided for her family. She left bequests to Lucrezia's children in Ferrara and to the children of her other sons. She ensured that the wealth she had spent a lifetime building would benefit her descendants, even those who were now part of other noble families. Venosa's life after the fall of the Borgias is perhaps the most impressive part of her story. She survived the shipwreck of her family's ambitions because she had built her own lifeboat. Her financial independence, her careful cultivation of a respectable identity, and her strategic philanthropy allowed her to live out her final years in peace and prosperity. Here she died a grande dame of Rome, a testament to her own intelligence and resilience. Number one, who really wrote the story of the evil, Borgia women? The first major history of Italy, The History of Italy by Francesco Guicciardini, was written in the 1530s, not long after the Borgia's time. Guicciardini was a Florentine diplomat who was hostile to the Borgias and their political ambitions. He repeated and embellished the worst rumors about the family, including the stories of poison and incest, presenting them as historical fact. Because his work was so influential and well regarded, it became the primary source for future historians for centuries. His version of the story, written by a political enemy, became the accepted truth. The popular image of the Borgia women, Lucrezia the poisoner, Venosa the scheming mistress, Julia the courtesan, is not a pure reflection of who they were. It is a narrative constructed after their deaths, written largely by their enemies. To understand the real women, we have to understand who wrote their story and why. The first authors of the Borgia black legend were their contemporary rivals. In the cutthroat world of Italian Renaissance politics, reputation was a weapon. The great families of Rome, like the Orsini and the Colonna, saw the Borgias as Spanish upstarts who had usurped their traditional power. The rulers of other Italian states, like Florence and Venice, feared the Borgias' ambition to create a strong, centralized state in the heart of Italy. They all had a vested interest in portraying the Borgias in the worst possible light. Diplomats sent home dispatches filled with the most lurid gossip, which was then circulated and amplified. The humiliated Giovanni Sforza, Lucrezia's first husband, started the most damaging rumors of all as an act of personal and political revenge. After the Borgias' fall, the next pope, Julius II, was a della Rovere, one of the families that had suffered most under Alexander VI. He launched a systematic campaign to blacken the Borgia name, a process known as damnatio memoria, or the damnation of memory. By portraying his predecessor as a monster, he legitimized his own rule and discredited any remaining Borgia allies. Then came the historians. Francesco Guicciardini's work was critical. As a Florentine, he saw Cesare Borgia's campaign in the Romagna as a direct threat to Florence's interests. His history is a brilliant piece of writing, but it is also a piece of political propaganda. He took the rumors and the gossip and presented them with the authority of a serious historian. Later Protestant reformers, in their efforts to discredit the Catholic Church, seized upon the story of Pope Alexander VI and his family as the ultimate example of papal corruption. The Borgias became a convenient symbol for everything they believed was wrong with Rome. For centuries, this was the only version of the story that was told. It was repeated and sensationalized by novelists, playwrights, and opera composers. Lucrezia, in particular, became a stock character, the beautiful, evil woman who trapped men with her charm and dispatched them with a poisoned ring. It was not until the late 19th and 20th centuries that professional historians began to challenge this narrative. They went back to the original sources, the city archives, the family letters, the financial records. They began to piece together a more complex and nuanced picture. They found the records of Lucrezia's capable administration in Spoleto and Ferrara. They discovered Venazza's property deeds and her detailed will. They read the letters that showed these women as mothers, friends, and administrators. This new research did not erase the negative aspects of the Borgia story. The family was ambitious, ruthless, and often brutal in their pursuit of power. But it revealed that the one-dimensional, cartoonishly evil figures of legend were a distortion. The real Borgia women were far more fascinating. They were intelligent, resilient, and resourceful individuals who navigated a dangerous world with skill and determination. The story of the evil Borgia women was not written by them, but for them by the men who feared their power and wanted to erase their true legacy.